Welcome back into HQ Spotlight. We are now just 66 days away until Selection Sunday. It may seem like a big number.
Just love the music.
Just around the corner.
Give me all those music. Turn it up.
Just around the corner. It's been a thrilling ride in college basketball so far. Back-to-back champs, UConn Huskies, not the top dog so far this season. The SEC is having a phenomenal showing. Some conferences we've come to expect to be heavy hitters, like the Big 12. Somewhat of a softer swing so far for them. So let's do our very first bracketology of the season. For that, we bring in our bracketologist, Jerry Palm. By the way, you can find on his articles on CBSSports.com, as Gary Parrish as well. You can also hear him on the Eye on College Basketball podcast. Jerry, I'm going to start with you on these GP of follow. Let's start with the number one overall seeds you have. Kyle Boone put out his power rankings yesterday, and he said if Auburn is the best team in the country right now, until you prove me wrong, especially with Tennessee falling to Florida. Auburn, you do have them as a one seed. Jerry, who else have you got?
Yeah, I have Auburn as the overall number one seed as well, so I agree with Kyle on that. I have Duke, Iowa State, and Alabama rounding out the top line. Florida, Tennessee contenders as well. They're 5 and 6. Florida's overall schedule, and especially their non-conference schedule, doesn't really measure up with the other teams they're competing with. But what they did to Tennessee the other day was one of the most impressive performances of the season so far. So obviously a lot of contention for the top line of that bracket. But right now I have Florida and Tennessee off, and Alabama, who's played a very good schedule, in that fourth number one spot.
Yeah, Jerry and I, Amanda, are pretty much on the same page here. I'm not a bracketologist, but I do rank 26 basketball teams every morning, and I try to do it with the same mindset, or at least a similar mindset, that the selection committee would take into their room. So right now I've got Auburn at number 1, Iowa State at number 2, and Duke at number 3. So those would be my top 3 number 1 seeds, just like Jerry has them. Where I would differ with him just a little bit, and we're splitting hairs, I would have Florida over Alabama. To be clear, I've got Florida 4 in the top 25 and 1, and Alabama 5. So again, right there. But Florida is 3 and 1 in quadrant 1. Alabama 3 and 2. But Alabama, in fairness to the Crimson Tide, does have more good stuff in quadrant 2. So both have big wins. Florida over Tennessee, Alabama over Houston. I wouldn't stand up and fight about it for 30 minutes, but right now I would have Florida just slightly ahead of Alabama. Either way, those 5 teams should be the top 5 on most people's bracket line right now.
We'll keep you out of the boxing ring as of right now, Gary Parrish, even though you are there in New York. MSG isn't too far from you. What about conferences? Look, I mentioned coming into this, the SEC is having a great showing so far this season. I think I last checked the AP top 25. They had 6 teams in the top 10. Which conferences right now, Jerry, have the best showing?
Well, in my bracket, I have the SEC and the Big Ten, each with 11. Of course, the Big Ten's bigger because they have 18 teams versus 16 in the SEC. But really the biggest difference is that I've got 7 SEC teams in the top 16, the top quadrant of the bracket, which makes bracketing a lot of fun because you have to try and separate those teams as best you can. But it just shows the strength at the top of the SEC, that they've got that many teams in the top part of the bracket. The Big Ten tends to own more the middle of the bracket, the 5, 6, 7 seed range. It tends to be filled with most of the Big Ten teams. But those 2 teams are having great seasons. Those 2 leagues, I'm sorry, are having great seasons. But it's been especially strong at the top of the SEC.
Yeah, those are the 2 best leagues in the country, I think, by a significant margin this season. It's really not even debatable. They're both extremely deep. Like Jerry said, he's got it projected right now for the SEC to have 11 teams in the NCAA tournament. Big Ten also 11 teams. That means both are, by definition, in contention right now to either tie the record set by the ACC or perhaps even break it. But Jerry's exactly right. I see it the same way he does. They might both have 11 teams worthy of being in the bracket right now, but the SEC is the better league, and it's because of the strength at the top. For instance, in my top 25 and 1 right now, I've got 6 SEC teams in the top 10. I only have 1 Big Ten team in the top 10, and that is Michigan State at number 9. So the strength at the top of the SEC is what separates it from the Big Ten and everybody else. The SEC might have 5, 6, even 7 teams capable of actually winning the national championship. In the Big Ten, clearly that number is going to be a lot lower.
This isn't always the case when it comes to college basketball, but right now this is very parallel to what is going on in the world of college football with those two conferences. A surprise conference, Jerry, that we have seen with not a great showing so far this season is the Big 12, which has historically been very good. Yes, you had Texas and Oklahoma leave. A couple other schools join into the Big 12. But what is going on with that conference? Why are we seeing them toward the top of these lists?
Yeah, it's been kind of a rough year and not living up to expectations. And Iowa State, we talked about their #1 seed right now, and they're having a tremendous season. But the preseason #1, Kansas, hasn't really got it all put together yet. Now, I've got them as a 4, so it's they're not falling apart or anything, but they haven't really played at the level that most have expected them to play at. This is a team that a lot of people picked to win the national championship prior to the season, but they also don't have great depth. And I've got 8 teams in the bracket, but there's a big gap between Kansas and the rest of the teams in this bracket. And the rankings for these teams are a bit deceiving. Houston is number 4 in the net, but their best win is BYU. And the BYU is not a bracket team. They haven't beaten anyone that looks like a tournament team. Texas Tech at 17, same problem. Their best win is BYU, albeit on the road, but they have 2 quad 3 losses. These are teams that are hard to fit in much higher in the bracket as their net rankings might indicate. But of course, part of the problem is it's early January. We're not even really halfway through the season yet. And so the metrics are not very reliable. And that's especially true of the ones that are based on margin of victory. The great example of that is that Kansas won at UCF by 51 points. And UCF dropped 21 spots in the rankings as a result of that. And it's just really hard to judge these teams because that's just one game, and the committee's not going to view that as the disaster that it was in the rankings.
Like Jerry said, Iowa State has been terrific, expected to be good, perhaps even better than most people expected. Whatever issues there are with the Big 12, do not blame it on the Cyclones. But Houston, they've already lost 3 times, 3 non-league games, and yeah, the Cougars got incredible computer numbers like Jerry noted, but they do not have a resume that will support that at all. Kansas, preseason #1, has already lost 3 times. Baylor has already lost 4 times. Arizona might be getting on track now, but has already lost 5 times. And Cincinnati has been disappointing, 0-3 in the Big 12 so far. So this league, the Big 12, has been the best conference in the country, according to the computers, each of the past 3 years, and one of the top 2 for a significant period of time. But right now it ranks 3rd and probably is not going to be able to crack the top 2. It's a down year for the Big 12, undeniably.
Let's look at some bubble teams. Jerry, who do you have as your last 4 in right now?
Yeah, I've got New Mexico on that list. And it's funny because you get down to the bottom of this list and you've got teams that have got really gaping holes in their resumes. But I have New Mexico, Arizona State, Mizzou, and UCF as the last team in the field, despite that 51-point loss to Kansas.
Yeah, and I just want to focus on Missouri there. Jerry Palm's got Mizzou as one of his last 4 in. 12-3 in the non-league portion of their schedule. Only losses to top 20 teams in the AP poll, specifically Memphis, Illinois, and Auburn. They got the big win over Kansas. Mark Mitchell, the Duke transfer, is the leading scorer, second leading rebounder. So considering this is a program at Missouri that went 0-18 in the SEC last season, to be 12-3 through this part of your schedule is tremendous. They are in position to make the NCAA tournament. 8-10 in the league would probably be good enough. 7-11 might even get them there. Really good stuff for Dennis Gates so far. They got a long way to go before they cross the finish line, but if the goal was to get through your non-league schedule and be in position to receive an at-large bid, a reasonable position to get an at-large bid, Missouri has accomplished that.
66 days until Selection Sunday. Let's go first 4 out, Jerry. And look, Chris Hassel isn't at work today. He's lazy. He doesn't work Fridays. He got Iowa on this list. Who else, Jerry?
Yeah, Arkansas, Iowa, Vanderbilt, and St. Bonaventure, who's actually got off to a pretty good start in the A-10. I don't know if the A-10 is going to be able to put 2 teams in. Someone's going to have to get hot and separate themselves from that league, the rest of that league. Maybe 2 someones are going to have to do that. Dayton has kind of fallen back a little bit after getting off to really the best start. But the A-10 could end up being a multi-bid league this year, but we'll have to wait and see.
In the preseason, I think it wouldn't be a negative surprise for 3 of those 4 teams to be on that list. But Arkansas is not supposed to be there. This is becoming a real story. They've slipped the Razorbacks to 48 in the net, which represents 14th in the SEC. John Calipari is now 0-2 in league play for the first time since 2003-2004 when he was at Memphis. Arkansas is 1-4 in the first 2 quadrants. Mentioning Memphis, his old school, the Tigers have 10 wins inside the first 2 quadrants right now. Arkansas, again, has 1. So unless the Razorbacks upset Florida this weekend, and good luck, they're going to drop to 1-5 in the first 2 quadrants. Big on NIL, incredible roster, at least from a talent perspective, a roster good enough that was to be ranked 16th in the preseason AP poll, but it's not coming together on the court. You look around right now, and there's multiple teams in the top 10 that were supposed to be worse than Arkansas, and yet Arkansas finds itself unranked. John Calipari, a lot of pressure on him. If he doesn't get it turned around, that pressure will just intensify.
GP, enjoy yourself there in New York in studio. Jerry Palm, we appreciate it. Again, the first bracketology of the season, but you can find more on CBSSports.com. Gary Parrish, Matt Norlander, the host of the Eye on College Basketball podcast, one of the most entertaining podcasts you will find out there. It is an incredible listen. They came up with a new game, Tommy.
What is it?
I'm not going to tell you what it is.
Oh, I got to go check it out.
Because I can't remember the name.
Okay.
And I don't know if it is appropriate, the name that I remember. So you got to go listen to the podcast.
That might be on brand with what they've got going.
Exactly.
I love it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.